The horizon burned crimson as Abigail Vance leaned against the window frame of her small one-room cabin, watching the last travelers pack their wagons and flee Rock Springs, Wyoming. The exodus had begun 3 days ago when the first cases of the fever appeared. And now, as the sun set on June 18, 1878, she found herself alone, too weak to even walk across the room. Abigail's fingers trembled as she pulled the faded cotton curtain closed. Waves of heat radiated from her skin despite the cool evening breeze. She had been among the first to fall ill, but unlike the others who had family to help them flee or neighbors willing to risk exposure, she had no one. At 24 years old, she had already outlived her parents and brother, all victims of a mining accident 2 years prior. The small dress shop she operated had provided her a modest living, but not the deep connections that might have compelled someone to stay behind. With effort that made her lungs burn, Abigail pushed herself away from the window and staggered toward her bed. The room tilted violently, floorboards rushing up to meet her as consciousness slipped away. She awoke to the sensation of something cool against her forehead. For a moment, she believed she was dreaming until a deep voice cut through the fog of her fever. "Easy now. You've been out cold for hours." Abigail's eyes fluttered open to find a man kneeling beside her bed. His weathered face was framed by dark blonde hair that curled slightly at his collar, and his eyes, a deep blue like the Wyoming sky after a storm, regarded her with concern. "Who are you?" Her voice emerged as barely more than a whisper, her throat raw from coughing. "Name's August Valdez. Found you collapsed when I was checking the town for stragglers." He removed the damp cloth from her forehead, dipped it in a basin of water beside the bed, and wrung it out before replacing it. "Looks like everyone else has cleared out. Why? Why did you stay?" Abigail struggled to focus on his face, the room still swimming around her. August's expression hardened. "I've seen what panic does to folk. Leaving the sick behind isn't right." He stood and moved to the small stove in the corner of the room. "Can you stomach some broth?" Abigail managed a weak nod, though she wasn't certain she could. "My name is Abigail Vance. I know who you are, Miss Vance. Seen you at your shop in town." He stirred something in a pot, his broad shoulders blocking her view. "Never had occasion to introduce myself properly. I work cattle for the Drummond spread north of here." Abigail had seen him before, she realized, riding through town with the other ranch hands. He'd always stood out taller than most, with a quiet dignity that set him apart from the rowdier cowboys. "The fever," she began, fighting against another coughing fit. "It's dangerous. You shouldn't be here." August returned to her bedside with a cup of steaming broth. "Had yellow fever down in Texas years back. Doctor who pulled me through said once you've had it, you're not likely to catch it again." His large, calloused hand slid behind her head, gently helping her to sit up enough to drink. "Can't say for certain this is the same, but I'm willing to chance it." The broth burned her throat, but Abigail forced herself to swallow. Each sip seemed to require all her strength. "That's enough for now," August said, lowering her head back to the pillow. "Rest. I'll be here when you wake." "Why?" she whispered, already feeling consciousness slipping away again. His answer followed her into darkness. "Because nobody deserves to suffer alone." When Abigail next opened her eyes, faint daylight filtered through the curtains. She was alone in the room, but the door stood open, and she could hear movement outside. The fever still raged through her body, but her mind felt marginally clearer. August appeared in the doorway, arms loaded with firewood. "You're awake," he observed, depositing the wood beside the stove. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been trampled by horses," Abigail admitted. "But I'm alive," he nodded, his expression grave. "That's more than some can say." Found 2 dead over at the boarding house this morning. Abigail closed her eyes, pain that had nothing to do with her illness washing over her. Who? Old man Peterson and a miner I didn't recognize. August poured water from a pitcher into a cup. I buried them out behind the church. Seemed the proper thing to do. Thank you, she whispered, for doing what no one else would. He brought the cup to her, again supporting her head as she drank. Town's empty except for us now. Sheriff Cooper left a note on his door saying they'd set up a quarantine camp 10 miles west, by Eagle Creek. Anyone who makes it through the fever is welcome there, once they're sure they're not contagious. Abigail tried to push herself up but fell back, her arms too weak to support her weight. We should go there. You've done enough. You're in no condition to travel, August cut her off firmly. And I'm not about to leave you. His determination silenced her protests. She studied his face, noticing the stubble darkening his jaw and the fatigue in his eyes. How long have you been here? 3 days now. 3 days. Abigail's shock gave her voice momentary strength. I've lost that much time, August nodded. Fever's had you delirious. You've been talking up a storm, though most of it didn't make much sense. Heat that had nothing to do with her illness crept into Abigail's cheeks. What did I say? A small smile softened his features. You called me Gabriel a few times, asked if I'd come to take you to heaven. Abigail groaned with embarrassment, but August continued. You also talked about your family, your brother James, your parents. His voice gentled. I'm sorry for your loss. 2 years now, Abigail whispered. The mind collapse took them all at once. August's hand found hers, his calloused palm warm against her skin. I lost my mother to fever when I was 14. My father 6 years later to a stampede. In the quiet that followed his words, Abigail felt a connection form between them, a shared understanding of grief that required no further explanation. I need to check your fever, August said after a moment, releasing her hand. His palm pressed against her forehead, his touch gentle despite his roughened skin. Still burning. Think you can manage more broth. You need strength to fight this. The next several days passed in a blur of fever dreams and brief moments of clarity. August remained a constant presence, spooning broth between her cracked lips, bathing her face and arms with cool water when the fever peaked, and speaking to her in low, soothing tones when nightmares made her cry out. On what August told her was the 7th day since he'd found her, Abigail awoke feeling different. The oppressive heat that had consumed her body had receded, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion but also a newfound clarity. She blinked against the morning sunlight streaming through the window and realized August had opened the curtains. He sat in a chair near the stove, head tilted back against the wall, eyes closed in sleep. His hat rested on his lap, and his chest rose and fell in the deep, steady rhythm of exhaustion. Abigail took the opportunity to truly look at him for the first time. August Valdez was not classically handsome in the way some men were, but there was a compelling strength in his features, the straight line of his nose, the determined set of his jaw, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than she'd seen. His hands, resting limply at his sides, bore the calluses and small scars of a lifetime of hard work. As if sensing her gaze, his eyes opened. For a moment they simply looked at each other across the small room. Your eyes are clear, he said finally, straightening in the chair. How do you feel? Weak, Abigail admitted, but better. The fire inside seems to have died down. August crossed to her bedside and laid a hand on her forehead. His touch lingered longer than necessary, and Abigail found herself leaning into it slightly. Fever's broken, he confirmed, a genuine smile breaking across his face for the first time since she'd met him. The transformation was remarkable. His entire countenance lightened, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "You've turned the corner, Miss Vance." "Abigail," she corrected him softly. "After what you've done for me, I think you've earned the right to use my given name." "Abigail," he repeated, and somehow her name sounded different in his voice, more significant somehow. "Think you might be up to eating something more substantial than broth today?" She nodded. "I believe I could try." As August moved to the stove, Abigail realized something with sudden clarity. "You need rest," she called to him. "You've been caring for me without a break for days." August glanced over his shoulder. "I've caught sleep when I could." "In that chair from the looks of it," Abigail countered. "That can't be comfortable," he shrugged, turning back to the pot he was stirring. "I've slept worse places." "Where have you been washing up, getting fresh clothes?" Abigail suddenly felt mortified at the realization of how much intimate care he must have provided during her worst days. "There's a pump out back," August explained. "And I rode out to my place once to grab some things when you were sleeping peacefully." He brought her a bowl containing what looked like stew. "Nothing fancy, but it's got more substance than broth." Abigail tried to sit up on her own but found her arms still too weak. Without comment, August slid an arm behind her shoulders and raised her, then stacked pillows to support her. The easy strength with which he moved her was both intimidating and comforting. "Thank you," she said, accepting the bowl, "for everything. I would have died without you." August's gaze met hers, intense and sincere. "You're stronger than you know, Abigail Vance. You were fighting before I ever came along." She managed a few spoonfuls of the stew before fatigue made her hands tremble. August took the bowl from her without comment and set it aside. "Rest now," he told her. "Your body's still healing." "Only if you'll do the same," Abigail insisted. "Take my parents' old room next door. The bed's still made up." August hesitated, then nodded. "Call out if you need anything. I'm a light sleeper." After he left, Abigail found herself staring at the door, feeling strangely bereft despite knowing he was just on the other side of the wall. She drifted off to sleep with the memory of his smile warming her more thoroughly than any fever. The following days brought steady improvement. Abigail progressed from sitting up in bed to taking tentative steps across the room with August's support. Her first success in walking unassisted to the window and back left her trembling with exhaustion but flushed with triumph. August proved to be not just a capable nurse, but also an unexpectedly good cook, producing simple but hearty meals from the limited supplies available in the abandoned town. They fell into a comfortable routine, taking their meals together and talking long into the evenings as Abigail's strength returned. She learned that August had come to Wyoming 10 years earlier as a 17-year-old boy looking for work after his father's death. He'd worked his way up from ranch hand to foreman, saving carefully with dreams of someday having land of his own in turn. She told him about growing up in Rock Springs, the daughter of a miner and a seamstress who had taught her every stitch and seam. She shared stories of opening her dress shop after her mother's death, determined to carry on the family trade. On the evening of her 12th day of recovery, Abigail sat in a chair by the open window, breathing in the fresh summer air. August had brought her a mug of coffee, and she cradled it between her hands, savoring its warmth and aroma. "We should think about heading to that quarantine camp soon," August said, leaning against the wall opposite her. "Town supplies won't last forever, and you're well enough to travel now, I reckon." Abigail nodded slowly, though the thought of returning to a crowd of people, even familiar faces from town, filled her with unexpected dread. These quiet days with August had become precious to her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. "How soon?" she asked. "Couple more days, perhaps. Want to make sure you've got enough strength for the journey." He studied her face. unless you're eager to be among others again. No, Abigail admitted softly. This has been peaceful despite everything. She looked up at him. Strange, isn't it, to find peace in the midst of such circumstances? August's gaze held hers. Not so strange. Sometimes it takes being stripped of everything to see what really matters. And what matters to you, August Valdez? The question slipped out before she could consider its boldness. He didn't answer immediately, taking a slow sip of his coffee instead. When he finally spoke, his voice had roughened slightly. Honesty, hard work, a man's word being his bond. He set his mug down on the small table beside him. And kindness. The world could use more of that. You've shown me more kindness than anyone I've known, Abigail said. August shook his head. Just did what needed doing. No, Abigail insisted. Most people did what was easy, they ran. You stayed. You chose the difficult path when everyone else fled. A flush crept up August's neck and he looked away. Anyone would have done the same. We both know that's not true. Their eyes met again, and something shifted in the space between them, a recognition of feelings neither had intended to develop. August cleared his throat and straightened. Best get some rest. Tomorrow we can try a slightly longer walk, maybe even out to the garden behind the house. That night, lying in her bed listening to the familiar sounds of August moving around in the next room, Abigail acknowledged to herself what her heart had already recognized. She was falling in love with the quiet cowboy who had saved her life. The next morning dawned clear and mild, perfect for the short expedition August had proposed. Abigail dressed in her own clothes for the first time since falling ill, a simple calico day dress that hung looser than it once had. Her hair, which August had awkwardly but gently helped her wash 2 days prior, was braided and pinned up in a simple style. When she emerged from her bedroom, August was waiting by the back door. His eyes traveled over her, taking in the transformation from invalid to a proper lady, and something like appreciation flickered in his gaze. You look more yourself, he said. I feel more myself, Abigail replied with a small smile. Though these clothes seem to belong to someone a bit larger than me now. August offered his arm. Nothing a few good meals won't fix. The short walk to the garden left Abigail winded but exhilarated. The vegetable patch behind her family's home had gone somewhat wild in her absence, but there were still carrots, potatoes, and late peas to be harvested. August helped her to a bench beneath an apple tree while he gathered vegetables for their evening meal. Abigail tilted her face to the sun, savoring its warmth without the accompanying internal fire of fever. It's so quiet, she observed. I've never heard Rock Springs this silent. August straightened from his work. Been thinking about that. Town will fill back up once the epidemic passes. Always does. Yes, Abigail agreed, though the thought brought less comfort than it should have. Life will return to normal. August brushed dirt from his hands and came to sit beside her on the bench, leaving a respectful distance between them. Is that what you want? Things to go back to how they were before, the question caught her off guard. Before she could formulate an answer, August continued. Been thinking about that quarantine camp. Not sure it's the right place for you yet. Abigail turned to face him. What do you mean? My place, it's small, but it's isolated. 15 miles north of here. August stared at his hands. Might be better for you to finish recovering there, away from a camp full of people who might still be carrying sickness. Hope fluttered in Abigail's chest, but caution tempered it. That's very considerate, but I wouldn't want to impose further. You've already done so much. Not an imposition. August's eyes, when they met hers, held both determination and vulnerability. Truth is, I'm not ready to let you go just yet, Abigail Vance. The simple honesty of his statement took her breath away. I'm not ready to be let go, she confessed quietly. August's hand found hers on the bench between them, his rough fingers curling around her smaller ones. They sat in companionable silence, the weight and warmth of his hand anchoring Abigail in a way she hadn't felt since losing her family. The following day, they prepared for the journey to August's homestead. He rode into the deserted center of Rock Springs, returning with a wagon borrowed from the livery stable. Left a note explaining who took it and why, he told Abigail as he loaded her few belongings. "We'll return it when you're fully recovered." Abigail had spent the morning writing her own note to post on her shop door, explaining her absence to anyone who might return before she did. As August helped her into the wagon, she looked back at the small cabin that had been her family's home. "I'll come back," she promised softly, as much to herself as to the silent building. August settled beside her on the wagon seat. "Whenever you want," he assured her. "I'll bring you myself." The journey took most of the day, with August setting an easy pace to accommodate Abigail's still fragile condition. They traveled through rolling grasslands dotted with sagebrush, the distant mountains providing a majestic backdrop. August pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his years working this territory, while Abigail found herself studying his profile against the vast Wyoming sky. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, August guided the wagon down a gentle slope toward a small creek. Nestled in a protected hollow stood a modest cabin with a small barn and corral beside it. "It's not much," August said, a note of apology in his voice. "Been adding to it bit by bit when I have time away from ranch work." Abigail took in the neat homestead with its vegetable garden, the smoke house behind the cabin, and the small apple orchard just beginning to take hold. "It's wonderful," she said sincerely. "You've built something real here." The pride in August's eyes at her words made something warm unfurl in Abigail's chest. He helped her down from the wagon and led her inside the cabin. Though small, it was tidy and well crafted, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. The furniture was simple but sturdy, clearly made by August's own hands. "You'll take my bed," he said, showing her to a curtained alcove containing a bed with a patchwork quilt. "I'll sleep by the fire." Abigail opened her mouth to protest, but August gently touched her arm. "No arguments on this, please. You still need proper rest to fully recover." That first evening in August's home established a new rhythm to their days. August rose before dawn to tend to chores, returning to make breakfast which they shared at his small table. During the day, as Abigail's strength continued to return, she began taking on small tasks, first just keeping the cabin tidy, then graduating to helping prepare meals and eventually assisting with the vegetable garden. Evenings were spent by the fire, August whittling or mending tack while Abigail worked on repairing clothing or reading aloud from one of the few books August owned. It was a simple life, far removed from the bustle of even a small town like Rock Springs, but Abigail found herself more content than she had been in years. 2 weeks into their arrangement, Abigail ventured to ask the question that had been on her mind. "Don't you need to return to your job at the Drummond Ranch?" August looked up from the bridle he was repairing. "Sent word with a passing rider last week. Mr. Drummond's a fair man. Told him I was helping a survivor of the fever and needed time." His hands resumed their work. "Said I'd be back when you were fully recovered." "I'm keeping you from your livelihood," Abigail realized with dismay. August shook his head. "I have savings, and this place provides most of what I need." His eyes met hers across the room. "Being here isn't a hardship, Abigail." The way he said it, the quiet sincerity in his voice, made it clear he was speaking about more than just the location. "It isn't for me either," she replied softly. As days turned to weeks, the lines between caregiver and companion blurred. August no longer needed to help Abigail walk or perform basic tasks, yet they remained in constant orbit around one another, finding reasons to work side by side, their hands occasionally brushing in ways that sent sparks through Abigail's veins. They spoke of their pasts, their dreams, their fears. August confessed his ambition to expand his modest holdings into a proper ranch someday. Abigail shared her hope of growing her dress shop to serve not just Rock Springs but the surrounding territories as well. "You're quite talented," August observed one evening as Abigail mended one of his shirts, adding small, decorative stitching around the collar that transformed the plain garment. "Your shop will flourish when you return. When you return." The words hung in the air between them, a reminder that their current arrangement was temporary, a recognition that neither seemed eager to confront. August cleared his throat. "Been thinking about making a trip to town soon. Check if people have started coming back, get news about the epidemic." Abigail's hands stilled on her sewing. "Do you think it's safe? Should be by now. Been nearly 6 weeks since we left." He studied her face. "Would you want to come along, see your shop?" Abigail considered the prospect of returning to civilization. A month ago, she would have jumped at the chance, but now the thought filled her with conflicting emotions. "Perhaps next time," she said finally. "I'm not sure I'm ready yet." August nodded, relief visible in the slight relaxation of his shoulders. "I'll only be gone a day, 2 at most." 2 mornings later, Abigail stood in the yard watching August saddle his horse for the journey to Rock Springs. The separation, though brief, loomed large between them. "Don't forget Mrs. Henderson's remedy for headaches," Abigail reminded him, referring to the list of items they'd agreed he should try to obtain in town. "And if the general store has any blue calico, it's all written down," August assured her, patting his shirt pocket. He finished securing his saddlebags and turned to face her. "You'll be all right here alone," Abigail nodded. "I know where everything is, and you showed me how to use your rifle if necessary." August's hand rose as if to touch her face, then dropped back to his side. "I'll be back tomorrow before sundown." "I'll be waiting," Abigail promised. She watched him ride away, the tall figure growing smaller against the vast landscape until he disappeared over a rise. The homestead felt immediately different without his presence, quieter, emptier somehow, despite its modest size. Abigail busied herself with the usual chores, trying not to count the hours until August's return. She weeded the garden, prepared a stew that would keep until the following day, and swept the cabin floor. With nothing left to occupy her hands, she took out the piece of mending she'd been working on a shirt of August's that she was embellishing with subtle decorative stitches. As she worked, Abigail found her mind wandering to the future. Soon she would be fully recovered, with no reason to remain at August's homestead. The thought of returning to her solitary life in Rock Springs, to the small room above her shop, filled her with an unexpected melancholy. These weeks with August had changed something fundamental within her. His steady presence, his quiet strength, and the gentle consideration he showed her had awakened feelings Abigail had never experienced before, feelings that both thrilled and terrified her. Night fell, and Abigail prepared for bed in the small alcove that had become her space. Lying beneath the patchwork quilt, she breathed in the lingering scent of August that permeated the bedding. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like if this arrangement weren't temporary, if the quiet moments they shared could stretch into years rather than weeks. Sleep came fitfully, her dreams filled with images of August riding away, but this time not returning. She woke at dawn feeling unrested, but determined to keep her mind occupied until his return. The day stretched endlessly. Abigail found herself pausing in her tasks to scan the horizon, hoping for a glimpse of August's approaching figure. By mid-afternoon, she had taken to sitting on the small bench beside the cabin door, her sewing forgotten in her lap as she watched the trail leading from town. When the sun began its descent toward the mountains, and there was still no sign of August, the first flutters of worry took root in Abigail's chest. She reminded herself that he had said he might be gone for 2 days, that countless innocent delays could explain his absence. Still, as darkness fell for the second night, she found sleep even more elusive than before. Dawn of the third day broke with no August. Abigail forced herself to eat breakfast and attend to necessary chores, but anxiety gnawed at her. By noon, she had made up her mind. If August didn't return by sunset, she would saddle the old mare he kept for pulling the small plow and ride toward town to look for him. The decision made, Abigail felt marginally calmer. She was hanging laundry on the line when movement on the horizon caught her attention. Shading her eyes against the sun, she made out a familiar silhouette August on horseback, though he was riding more slowly than his usual pace. Relief washed over her, followed quickly by concern at his unhurried approach. Abandoning the laundry basket, Abigail hurried down the path toward the approaching rider. As August drew closer, she could see he was slumped slightly in the saddle, and his normally straight posture was curved as if in pain. Alarm spiked through her. "August!" she called, breaking into a run despite her still recovering strength. He raised his head at the sound of her voice, and even from a distance, Abigail could see the unnatural flush on his face. When she reached him, she placed a hand on his leg and felt the heat radiating through his trousers. "You're burning with fever," she gasped. August's eyes, unnaturally bright, focused on her with difficulty. "Abigail," he murmured, "thought I might not make it back to you." "What happened?" she asked, reaching up to help him dismount. August swung his leg over the saddle with obvious effort and nearly collapsed as his feet hit the ground. Abigail braced herself against his weight as he leaned heavily on her. "Town's still mostly empty," he said, his words slightly slurred. "But there were a few cases of fever still lingering. Must have caught it while I was there." Fear clutched at Abigail's heart as she helped August toward the cabin. His normally sure stride was unsteady, and heat radiated from his body. "I thought you said you'd had yellow fever before," she said, struggling to keep him upright. "Different kind, maybe," August mumbled. "Or I was wrong about being immune." By the time they reached the cabin, August's breathing had grown labored and sweat beaded on his forehead. With tremendous effort, Abigail guided him to the bed in the alcove. "No," he protested weakly. "Your bed now." "Don't argue," Abigail said firmly, helping him sit on the edge of the mattress. "You need to lie down before you fall down." Too ill to protest further, August allowed her to remove his boots and help him stretch out on the bed. Abigail pressed a hand to his forehead, alarmed at the intense heat. "How long have you been feeling ill?" she asked, moving to fetch water from the bucket by the stove. "Started on the ride back yesterday," August admitted. "Thought I could make it home before it got bad." His eyes, fever bright, found hers as she returned with a dampened cloth. "Didn't want to worry you." "Well, I'm worried now," Abigail said, placing the cool cloth on his forehead. "And you should have stopped to rest instead of pushing yourself." A ghost of a smile touched August's cracked lips. "Wanted to get back to you." The simple statement, delivered through obvious pain, made Abigail's heart contract. She squeezed his hand. "I'm going to take care of you now," she promised, "just as you did for me." The next several hours were a flurry of activity as Abigail prepared for what she knew would be a difficult battle. She stripped August down to his underclothes, ignoring propriety in favor of necessity, and bathed his fevered skin with cool water. She brewed willow bark tea, coaxing him to drink small sips when he was lucid enough to swallow. She raided his small cache of medical supplies, finding a bottle of laudanum which she administered sparingly when his pain seemed most severe. By nightfall, August's fever had risen alarmingly. He thrashed against the bedding, his normally composed features contorted in pain. Abigail sat beside him, constantly refreshing the cool cloths on his forehead, neck, and chest, murmuring soothing words when delirium made him call out. "Mary," he mumbled at one point, reaching out blindly. "Mother, don't go." "SHH," Abigail soothed, catching his hand. "You're not alone, August. I'm here with you." His fingers tightened around hers with surprising strength. "Abigail," he whispered, momentary clarity returning to his gaze. "If I don't make it, don't," she cut him off fiercely. "Don't you dare say such things. You're going to fight this, August Valdez. You're going to survive." A faint smile touched his lips before his eyes fluttered closed again, exhaustion claiming him. Throughout the night, Abigail maintained her vigil, dozing only in brief snatches when August seemed peaceful. She prayed as she hadn't since her family's death, bargaining with God for this man's life with an intensity that surprised even herself. Dawn found her hollow-eyed but determined, still bathing August's fevered skin as he drifted between unconsciousness and delirium. The provisions he had brought back from town lay forgotten by the door where they had fallen when he collapsed, his mission to resupply them rendered meaningless in the face of his illness. The day passed in an exhausting blur. Abigail forced herself to eat small bites of bread and cheese, knowing she needed strength to care for August. She managed to coax more willow bark tea between his lips when he was lucid enough to swallow, and she continued the constant battle against his fever with cool cloths and sponge baths. By the second night, Abigail felt the familiar clutch of despair. August's fever seemed no better, and his periods of lucidity had grown shorter and further apart. She remembered the darkest moments of her own illness, when breathing had felt like drawing fire into her lungs, and the world had narrowed to nothing but pain and heat. "You can't leave me," she whispered, pressing her forehead against August's burning hand clasped between hers. "Not when I've only just found you." Whether it was her words or simply the natural course of the illness, August's eyes fluttered open. "Abigail," he rasped, his voice barely audible. She raised her head quickly. "I'm here. Water." Abigail helped him take a few sips from the cup beside the bed. "How do you feel?" "Like death warmed over," August admitted, his attempt at humor undermined by the weakness in his voice. "But still here." "And you'll stay that way," Abigail said firmly, brushing sweat-dampened hair from his forehead. "I won't accept any other outcome." A faint smile touched his cracked lips. "Yes, madam." He drifted back to sleep shortly after, but something had changed. His breathing seemed less labored, and though the fever still burned, the restless thrashing had subsided. Abigail allowed herself the first flicker of hope. By the third morning, August's fever had broken. Abigail woke from where she'd fallen asleep in the chair beside the bed to find him watching her, his eyes clear for the first time in days. "You look terrible," he said, his voice weak but steady. Abigail let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "That's rich, coming from you." August's hand found hers on the bedding. "You saved my life." "I returned the favor," Abigail corrected, squeezing his fingers, "though you gave me quite a scare. Sorry about that." His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. "How long was I out of my head?" 3 days, Abigail told him. Though the worst seems to have passed now, August nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. "You didn't leave." The simple statement held a wealth of meaning that made Abigail's heart constrict. "Of course I didn't leave," she said softly. "Where else would I go?" Something shifted in August's expression, a softening, a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show. "Nowhere, I hope," he said, his voice dropping to little more than a whisper. "I'd like you to stay, Abigail, not just until I'm recovered, not just until you're ready to return to town." His fingers tightened around hers. "For good, if you'd consider it." Abigail's breath caught in her throat. "August, I know it's sudden," he continued quickly, "and I'm not offering much this small cabin, a life that's harder than what you'd have in town, but I think we could build something good together." His eyes, still fever-bright but clear, held hers. "I've never met anyone like you, Abigail Vance, and I don't want to lose you when this is over." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes. "I don't want to be lost," she whispered. August's hand rose to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "Then stay. Not as my nurse or my guest. Stay as my wife." The proposal, delivered from a sick by a man still weak from fever, was perhaps not what Abigail had imagined as a girl. But the sincerity in August's eyes, the gentle strength in his touch, and the quiet certainty in his voice made it perfect. "Yes," she said simply, turning her face to press a kiss against his palm. "I'll stay." August's smile was like sunrise breaking across the plains, slow, beautiful, and full of promise. "I'll do right by you," he vowed. "Every day of my life." "I know you will," Abigail said, "just as I'll do right by you." She leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his, a kiss that sealed their promise more thoroughly than any formal vow. The following weeks brought healing to them, both. August recovering his physical strength, while Abigail finally reached the full bloom of health that the fever had stolen from her. They worked side by side to prepare the homestead for winter. August teaching Abigail the skills she would need as a rancher's wife, while she brought touches of comfort and beauty to the small cabin. They made one trip together into Rock Springs, finding the town slowly returning to life as residents trickled back from the quarantine camp, or from stays with distant relatives. Abigail arranged for her shop to be looked after by Mrs. Peterson, the milliner whose store adjoined hers, while she settled her affairs in preparation for marriage. The news of their engagement raised eyebrows among the townsfolk, many of whom remembered August as the quiet cowboy who kept to himself, and Abigail as the independent shopkeeper who had turned down several suitors in the years since her family's deaths. Epidemic romance, Mrs. Henderson clucked to her friends at the general store. Nothing like facing death to make people rush into things. Abigail, overhearing as she selected fabric for her wedding dress, simply smiled. Those who hadn't lived through what she and August had shared could never understand the bonds forged in that crucible of illness and recovery, of giving care and receiving it in turn. They were married on a crisp October morning, with golden aspen leaves creating a natural cathedral around the small church in Rock Springs. The ceremony was simple, attended by the handful of August's colleagues from the Drummond Ranch and the few townspeople Abigail counted as true friends. Mr. Drummond himself stood as August's best man, the rancher having developed a new respect for his foreman after learning how he had stayed to care for the sick during the epidemic. "You've got yourself a good man," Mr. Drummond told Abigail at the small reception following the ceremony. "One of the best I've ever had working for me." "I know," Abigail replied, her eyes finding August across the room where he was accepting congratulations from the other ranch hands. "I'm very fortunate." Mr. Drummond cleared his throat. "Told August I'd be keeping his job open for him, but he says he's focusing on his own place now." The older man raised an eyebrow. "Bold move." "We'll make it work," Abigail said confidently. "I'll continue to take in sewing, and August has plans to expand the cattle herd come spring." Mr. Drummond nodded approvingly. "Well, you ever need anything, you know where to find me." The journey back to the homestead that evening, their home now, truly shared, was filled with a quiet joy that needed few words. August had spent the previous week adding a proper bedroom to the cabin, extending the small structure to give them more space. He carried Abigail across the threshold in the traditional manner, setting her down in the middle of the room that now held not just his simple furnishings, but also Abigail's treasured possessions from her family home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Valdez," he said softly, his arms still around her waist. Abigail leaned into his embrace, savoring the strength and warmth of him. "It's perfect," she whispered. Later, as they lay tangled together in the new bed that now belonged to both of them, August traced the curve of Abigail's shoulder with gentle fingers. "When I rode into Rock Springs that day, looking for stragglers," he said quietly, "I never imagined I'd be riding out with my future in my arms." Abigail pressed closer against him, her head resting on his chest where she could hear the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. "When I collapsed on my cabin floor, certain I was going to die alone, I never imagined I'd be saved by the man I would spend my life loving." August's arms tightened around her. "I think perhaps we saved each other." The years that followed proved the truth of August's words. Together, they built a life that neither could have created alone. The small homestead grew into a proper ranch, with a herd of quality cattle and horses that drew buyers from as far away as Cheyenne. The cabin expanded room by room as their family grew, first with the birth of their son James, named for Abigail's lost brother, and 2 years later with the arrival of their daughter Mary, who carried August's mother's name. Abigail never reopened her shop in town, but her skills with needle and thread became legendary throughout the county. Ladies from Rock Springs and beyond made the journey to the Valdez Ranch to commission her work, providing a steady income that complemented the seasonal nature of ranching. August proved to be as devoted a father as he was a husband, teaching their children to ride almost before they could walk, instilling in them the values of hard work and kindness that had guided his own life. Abigail watched with pride as he patiently showed young James how to mend a fence or gentle a skittish colt, the same steady hands that had once bathed her fevered brow now guiding their son's smaller ones. They faced hardships, of course, seasons of drought that threatened the herd, harsh winters that tested their endurance, and the normal challenges of raising spirited children in a demanding environment. But they faced each obstacle together, their partnership forged in those desperate days of illness and recovery stronger than any trial that came after. On the 15th anniversary of the day August had found Abigail collapsed in her cabin, they stood together on the porch of their now substantial home, watching their children playing in the yard with the dogs. "You ever regret it?" August asked, his arm around Abigail's waist. "Leaving town? The life you might have had there?" Abigail leaned into his embrace, her head fitting perfectly against his shoulder as it always had. "Not for a single moment," she said honestly. "Everything I needed I found right here." August pressed a kiss to the top of her head, his touch still sending the same warmth through her veins as it had when they were younger. "That fever was the best thing that ever happened to me," he murmured against her hair. "Brought me to you." Abigail smiled, thinking of all the days and nights they had shared, all the joys and sorrows weathered together, all the love that had grown from those desperate beginnings. "Then I'm grateful for it too," she said softly. "Every painful moment was worth it for this life we've built." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and crimson, August and Abigail Valdez stood wrapped in each other's arms, Watching their children and looking toward a future, they would continue to create together a future born from illness but sustained by healing, from abandonment but nourished by devotion, from the darkest of circumstances but illuminated by the brightest of loves.